Sometimes I gotta remind myself that these guys are not the new LPS anymore. It's these guys. For some context, I did a tag type video years ago, the G4 LPS tag specifically. And with G7s being out, I think it'd be interesting to do a redo in a retrospective lens now that they're no longer the new pets. The original video was not really my best, to be honest. I think a lot of it was me being contrarian due to how overhated the G4s were, and a lot of copium because at that time, I lost all of my childhood LPS and was entering LPS 2 with only G4s. It's a long story involving moving, edgy middle school phase, and a friend I lost contact with. I still have half of my childhood collection now, but that's not the focus of the video, more so context on why the first version might have ended up that way. Anyway, since that first video, I feel a lot of my opinions on them has changed. I still don't mind G4. I know. But I'm also more critical about them now that I have had years to sit on it. The tag was created by Littlest Nature, but the original video has since been deleted, so I'll leave the questions in the description for preservation reasons. I did tweak some of the questions in this video to be past tense since these are no longer the new pets and this tag was made during the early waves of G4. Also, I know there's some debate on whether these are G4s or G5s or even what counts as G1 through 3. I'll be referring to them as G4 since this is the main way LPS Tube labels them and the ones the original tag was originally made for. Let's get to it then. Question 1. What do you like about the G4 LPS? First off, tons of mold variety, especially in terms of pet species. While G3 to 4 was pretty experimental with much of it being hit or miss, I think it's nice that they were branching out from like a lot of the standard pets we've seen in other generations like cats and dogs. Though I would argue that there was like a pretty decent variety in terms of like cats and dogs and other like pet type pets in general too. For a handful of like the unique molds, red pandas, gazelles, badgers, and even an eastern bongo, which I didn't know was a real animal until I got this LPS. Like, not all of them were hits, but I think it's worth appreciating for branching out so much, and like, at least trying to be more experimental during a time when a lot more companies were starting to drive in the direction of playing it safe. Compared to G3s, which I'm also a loose defender of, just not as much. I feel like the stylization compared to like G3 didn't deviate that much, if that makes sense. G3s feel like abstracted sculptures when put next to any other pet, for example. And while they did start off with a lot of wonkiness and paint job issues, I feel like they pulled the quality consistency better by Pets in the City. It's a shame that a lot of them got overlooked just because they were the new LPS at the time. The old LPS are timeless and I'm happy to be able to continue collecting them into adulthood, but I just feel like a lot of the better designed pets from these gens got the short end of the stick just because they were part of a generation that was such a heavy deviation from the main style of the LPS line. Though since my original video, some of my opinions have changed and I've gotten way more critical about G4s, which leads us into the next question. Question 2. What do you hate about the G4 LPS? Ironically, these ones were points I said I liked back then, but are actually my biggest points of criticism now. The first one being the deco bits. Like in theory, I like the idea of making accessories easier to put on without the need for extra stuff like blue tack or rubber bands. But looking back, deco bits were terrible. There are a ton of tiny, sharp, easy to lose, and accidentally step on plastic bits where most of them ended up being like random objects, or they were so tiny that they're barely believable as what they're trying to represent. And due to where the holes are on the pets, most of them would make sense on one but make no sense on someone else, defeating the whole purpose of making pets easy to accessorize. So now you're left with a bunch of random holes all over them, which depending on where they're placed on the pet, can be harder to ignore. The second point of critique is the fixed expressions. Like, I don't get why they did that, even from a show merch standpoint. Like, seriously, who greenlit perpetually miserable Penny Ling? I just feel bad for her. All it does is make acting with the LPS and play awkward since they're boxed into like being one personality type. Ma'am, sorry to inform you, but we've tried everything we could to save your husband, but in the end, he didn't make it. Oh, my dog, Slay! Did you hear me? I just said your husband died. I know, but the only thing I can do is Slay. I miss you, honey. Some people feel this change removed some agency, since it was having a role given versus let people create their own stories. And in this case, it's very much understandable. LPS compared to other toy lines is more open to interpretation, so having it shift to fixed characters and expressions was a weird choice. Though I'd say around the middle they did start to tone down the expressions, and by Pets in the City, this issue is less common. So I feel like there's still plenty of pickings for more neutral looking pets if you do want to have some to use in videos. With that rant over with, let's get on to question number 3. Do you play with them often? Not really? Though this has less to deal with the G4s though, and more of a I don't play with toys as often anymore. In terms of creating stories for fun, I usually go for writing in OCs, and for play it's gaming. I do like to keep some pets around on my desk, but I'm not sure whether or not picking them up to fidget for a few seconds counts as playing since I'm not really doing much with them. But that being said, I do find myself using G4s a lot less for this, but I think that's because I'm more nostalgic for the old style pets. Question 4. How many G4 LPS do you have? I took this photo of my G4s, but I ended up leaving out Pugson because I thought he was G6. But turns out, at least according to LPS merch, he's G4 or G5.5 according to the website. LPS generations are weird. And also I got a G4 in a mystery lot sometime after taking this pic, so it's 47. Question 5. If you were Hasbro, would you make the new LPS cuter? This one's definitely a question of its time. Referring to G4s, I would, but I think the answer to what that would look like is just LPS G6. Since I think out of the quote-unquote new generation LPS, those paid respect to the source material a lot more from a design standpoint and how I would approach it with all that I've learned art-wise since then. To be honest, I'm not sure what I was thinking in terms of fusing the G3s and G4s in the original video. I'm guessing younger me was being contrarian again. But even if I did mix elements from both that I liked, I think that would be better off as a standalone toy line than a good idea from the LPS, since it wouldn't fix the core issues of those ways being so different from the old style. Question 6. Did you play the app and scan the pets? For context, this is referring to the G4 LPS, and to that, not really. I think I installed it once just to see what it was, but from what I remembered, I got bored after a while. I can't say if it was a good or bad game, since I don't like city builder mobile games, and I don't really have much to compare it to. And these days, both the G3 and G4 apps are long off the App Store, and I really don't want to chase down a sketchy download through a sketchy website and risk giving my phone a virus just to check it out. But if you did play it, let me know in the comments what you thought. Question 7. Will you ever customize the G4 LPS? Since G4s were the main bases I used when I was an active customizer, I'll instead give some thoughts on working with them. Though keep in mind this is years later and I haven't used one as a base in over 5 years, so take this with a grain of salt. First, to follow up on a comment in my old video, I said they matched my aesthetic more, but I think what I meant to say was they were slightly closer to my own art style at the time in terms of using them as a custom base. But I think that was more of a skill issue, since in the long run, I don't think the style of a base affected or hindered the way my art came out. I've also found the rubber material made it more forgiving to carve into them while doing mods. Old styles have a hollow head, meaning sometimes carving will require you to patch up holes, while the solid rubber of G4s left some room for error. Though on patching up holes, you do have to worry about those if you don't want random dots in your customs, and you also have to be mindful of what clay you use so it doesn't shrink when it dries. The only thing is I'm pretty sure prep felt different. I'm pretty sure sculpting and making sure random bits didn't slide around was difficult. Achievable, but difficult. For some context, I use epoxy sculpt on the vast majority of my sculpted customs. And also, I remember the G4 pets didn't take too well to sanding since it's a softer material, so you have to use something like green stuff or epoxy sculpt on carved areas if you want them smoothed out. But again, it's been so long that I can't remember if it was a skill issue or an issue with the LPS base itself, and it would require me starting a new custom project with heavy sculpting to get a fresh perspective. Question 8. If your mascot is a G4 LPS, who would you pick? First off, both my main mascot and my old secondary mascot are G4s. I showed the LPS I was close to using in my first video, which, I'm gonna be real, I dodged a bullet by getting Zinnia in the mail. I can't defend younger me on this one. So instead, I'll talk about why I like Zinnia. Compared to other G4s at the time, I think she had one of the neater designs. She has a more neutral expression despite being one of the early waves. Plus, I like how colorful she is. It fit my art style at the time, which leaned heavy into colorful palettes and more cartoony aesthetics. And even though my art style has changed a lot since 2015, I think it still rings true. There's also the fact she was my first mail order pet. I never got a chance to get one of the G2 ones, so I think finally being able to participate even in the newer generation and get her was kind of a childhood dream fulfilled. Question 9. Since G4 LPS have names given to them already, do you rename them or do you just leave it? I used to keep the names, but I no longer bother with it because I forgot most of them over these years. The reason I originally kept them is because I was terrible at coming up with names, and I still kinda am, but there's honestly a lot of non-memorable ones to the point I can only remember a handful of them without looking them up. I'm not sure why, but most of the G4 LPS names compared to even other brands with large rosters of designs and characters, they just don't feel as memorable. Like compared to something like My Little Pony, they feel like these fake baseball league names people were making fun of them back then. I think going forward, I'm just gonna rename them just so they're not stuck with something like Unsen Sweemy. Question 10. Are you planning on collecting more G4 LPS? I say yes because there's still a bunch I missed out on from G4 and want to get my hands on. But admittedly, with the release of G7 and me now having the ability to buy old LPS secondhand online, there's less of an incentive to go after them anymore unless they're a dreamy. I grew up with the old style, and that's what's more nostalgic to me personally. So when I'm shopping around, I'm more inclined to buy those. Light G4s have a ton of cute designs, don't get me wrong, but not nearly as many as I would go out of my way to get, like I would with G1 through 2, so old LPS are getting the priority. And that's the end. Like I said in the beginning, I don't hate them. They're what let me get into LPS Tube during the time I lost my childhood LPS after all. But now that I've had years to sit on it, I'm able to step back and acknowledge the flaws they had. I guess that shows character growth or something. Because even with the things I like about it, G4 is a far from perfect wave and had a lot of issues like deco bits, weird gimmicks, and especially at the time feeling like Hasbro was not listening to the LPS community when they asked for like the older molds. I don't have anyone to tag for this, and ironically the tagging part of these things always made me anxious, so I guess I'll leave it open to anyone else who wants to do this in a retrospective lens. I don't have LPS socials anymore, so it's best to subscribe and hit the bell if you want to keep up with me, but thanks for stopping by. This is Nat. I guess it's break time. Oh. I still want that position as mascots, Zinnia. Oh, well, I gotta go. Bye.